All right, we've got 7:35. I want to welcome everyone to the call. I have to say it's great to see so many different folks, over 150 people on a call. I never thought that we'd be doing it in this way, but I am excited to see that nonetheless. So my name is Jesse Stedman. I'm the town planner here in Stowe. And just for the sake of folks who may not have saw the chat, I just wanted to reiterate that Stowe TV does have the presentation broadcasting live tonight, and this session will be recorded. And so along with this presentation, some of the other stuff that you see tonight, some of the background information, we're going to have a page on the planning department webpage that we'll have links to throughout the website so that you can easily get there. Go through any of the past documentation or maybe any of the things that you hear about tonight that you want to learn more on. As far as feedback during the presentation tonight, we're going to have a brief Q&A at the end, but the best thing to do is to chat your questions to the host, which you can do using the chat function down at the bottom of the screen. And we also have a email address set up so that we can take comments tonight and in future here as we move forward. And that is called stowakersplan@stow-ma.gov. And I will have that shown on the screen at the end of the presentation, and there will be some other links on the website, so you'll be able to find that. With the logistics done there, I do want to just say that I'm grateful and really happy to have the partners that we do have tonight that are going to be able to speak and talk about this idea for Stowe Acres that we're going to be presenting on. It's an exciting thing. And I want to take the opportunity to let everyone kind of introduce themselves and explain a little about their involvement. And so we'll do that first, and then we'll get to an agenda on the slides after that. Bob, I'm going to hand it over to you first. Bob Wilbur.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jesse. Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Wilbur. I'm the current president of the Stowe Conservation Trust. Stowe's all-volunteer local land trust, now in its 44th year. I want to start with some important context for this. Some of you may not be aware that the demand for golf peaked about a decade ago. And at that time, many additional golf courses that were on the drawing board ended up being built. And that really further created a issue of more supply than there was demand to support it. As a result, there are literally hundreds of golf courses across the United States going out of business and being sold for development as we speak. Some of you know that I work at Mass Audubon. I have 3 current projects conserving former golf courses in Massachusetts, just to underscore that point. To be clear, Stowe Acres Country Club is a premium facility, and we're really proud to have it in our community. And part of what this is all about is to help them continue and remain functioning in our community for as long as possible. About a year ago, I started hearing rumors that a large development was being proposed at Stowe Acres Country Club, and that the entire property might even be sold. Being the single largest undeveloped, unprotected property remaining in Stowe, that was a huge concern for me and for anyone who cares about open space in Stowe. And I know that's a lot of our residents. I'm really proud to say that. Stowe is a very green community, and we really value the open space in our community. I was concerned because of the open space opportunities that could be lost, and because of the lasting negative impacts it could have on Stowe if done poorly. For that reason, I came up with the idea of hiring a talented planning firm and cost sharing with the town of Stowe. And that ended up being the Stowe Conservation Trust paying half of it, the other half paid by the town, split between the Community Preservation Committee and the Town of Stowe Conservation Commission. We felt that that approach would give us the best chance of shaping the development plans that were rumored to be in the works, and also adding and integrating robust conservation and recreation components to those. The first step was to convince Stowe Acres owners and the prospective developers to put what they've been working on hold and commit instead to an innovative joint planning exercise led by the planner, Peter Flinker of Dodson and Flinker, who's with us tonight and the primary presenter tonight. When we asked the owner and the prospective developer, Peter Brown and Mark O'Hagan, to join in this unusual, non-traditional planning exercise, they were somewhat reluctant, and really who could blame them? This was something that really had never been done in Stowe before. Public and private, profit, nonprofit, development, and conservation all coming together in search of a shared vision, a vision that would be much more compelling than what any of us could put forth acting individually. The components of that shared vision were as follows. First, a comprehensive plan, something that would not leave large portions of the property yet to be decided, and instead to craft an outcome that had many compelling pieces of it with lots of benefits for our town of Stowe. And those include additional protections and ecological restoration of sensitive resource areas, prime sites for additional active recreation fields, ongoing golf at this location that's been such an important part of Stowe's identity for so long, and mixed residential development addressing an array of documented housing needs in Stowe. While there's still a lot of work to be done, every one of us is really excited about how each component adds value to the other, and the potential of this shared vision to benefit Stowe as a community in many ways in the years ahead. So I will pass on next to Kathy Sfera.
Thanks, Bob. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathy Sfera, and I'm the town's conservation director. I work for the Stowe Conservation Commission. I've lived in Stowe for about 20 years and spent my whole career working in conservation and in land use planning. And for me, Stowe Acres is really a key part of the town's history and the town's scenic character. Along with our other golf courses and farms, it provides important wildlife habitat and a sense of elbow room. It's much bigger than it appears when you look at it on the map or when you drive by on the roads. On a recent visit to Stowe Acres, I walked more than 3.5 miles around the perimeter, and that was just the north course. There is an enormous amount of potential there, and that really is why this property is a priority for all of us. Just in the last week, I came across a letter from the previous owners of Stowe Acres to the Board of Selectmen that was written in 1988, more than 30 years ago, which is frightening to think about. In it, the owners outlined concerns about rumors that the golf course was going up for development for hotels or for other uses. And what really struck me was how long residents of Stowe have been concerned about the future of Stowe Acres. It's a very emotional thing for many, and I want to acknowledge that up front. And so in addition to the unusual nature of this collaboration, which Bob just described, one of the things that's really exciting for me about this partnership is the opportunity to develop a comprehensive plan for the entirety of the property, rather than seeing piecemeal decisions made for the two courses. Many of us know all too well how difficult it is when the town gets just 120 days under Chapter 61, the right of first refusal process, to come up with a large amount of money to match a purchase agreement and take that to town meeting. And it hasn't always gone well for us. So it's really been our goal to reach out proactively to landowners when we know that a property is important to the town and not wait for it to be under agreement. I'd like to keep as much of this land open as possible within the financial realities that face the town. And I know many of you want to see that as well. But I think that this is also an opportunity to address other community goals like affordable housing and recreation, and to do it in a way that really complements and adds value to each of the uses. So I want to thank the team that's worked together for over these months. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. And I'm going to hand it off to Peter from Stow Acres.
Great, thanks, Kathy. My name is Peter Brown. I'm the representative for the owners of Stow Acres. And we've owned Stow Acres. It's coming up on 5 years this year. And we've enjoyed our time operating the club. Since we took over, we have looked at many different types of development. Some have been for the entire 2-course property, and several were for just different parcels. We've been close to negotiating P&S agreements at several times, including one near the end of last year. During last year, Mark O'Hagan came to us with a proposal for a residential development. And we went into the town, we went in to see Kathy and Jesse with our ideas. And they in turn brought Bob Wilbur and Stowe Conservation Trust into the equation and asked us to put together and be part of a master plan for the entire site. To tell you the truth, we were apprehensive, but we also saw the potential where this could be the best outcome for all parties. So we joined in. Flinker and Dodson was brought in to do some planning and analysis. And I think the plan they've put together is an excellent plan. It provides continued golf, historic preservation, additional recreational space, conservation, restoration of conservation areas, public access, and housing, all in a comprehensive package. We're very excited about this prospect. It keeps 18 holes on the south side, which is the older of the 2 courses, 100 years old this year, along with the clubhouse and its historic value. And the development will allow us to then be able to invest, hopefully, in a new driving range, a new maintenance facility, possibly a new cart barn for electric carts instead of gas carts. And it still maintains 9 holes for some period of time on the north side. So we look forward to hearing some feedback from tonight's meeting, and we look forward to putting together additional plans and working through the permit process going forward. I'd like to bring in Mark O'Hagan now to introduce himself.
Mark, you muted.
Mark, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Mark O'Hagan from MCO and Associates and MCO Housing Services. I'm a local developer. I've resided in Bolton for about 30 years. Over my career, I've been primarily focused on the creation of affordable communities and have been involved in many area projects, large and small. In addition to developing property, I have a service business providing lottery and distribution services to developers throughout Eastern Mass. We help people find quality, affordable homes for them and their family. Affordable housing is very important to me. During these past months, as we've been meeting in Stowe, I realized I spent the bulk of my career working in local communities, but not always working with local communities. The collaborative approach taken by the town of Stowe to bring a variety of stakeholders to the same planning table is an innovative and proactive effort. The integration of housing with continued golf, other recreational opportunities, and environmental protections benefit the Stowe community as well as potential future residents, all while protecting and enhancing an important local asset. We believe this innovative process, we can create a non-traditional community which can meet the needs of a broad range of people, incorporating for sale and rental alternatives, both at market and affordable prices. We can create homes allowing children that grew up in Stowe to stay in town and provide housing options for people that have spent their life in the community and want to stay. We're very excited to be involved in the effort and look forward to working with all the stakeholders to create a vibrant new community in Stowe. And Peter Flinker of Dodson and Flinker will introduce himself.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm Peter Flinker. I'm here with my colleague, Tia Novak. And we've been I guess, working with this team for about 6 months, and it's a really exciting project. I'm a landscape architect and planner, and we've been working for more than 30 years, primarily with cities and towns in Massachusetts, really helping communities try to find the balance between conservation of open space resources and development of housing and business opportunities that they need. And this is a really great project because it combines all of those things on a site which is big enough to really have a great impact on the future of the town. So it's really been a fun project, and I look forward to sharing what we've done with you tonight. I guess next we go back to Jesse.
Yeah, I think at this point we can bring up the slide deck, Peter.
All right. Everyone should be seeing the slide.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, so just real quick, I just wanted to reiterate the agenda I talked about earlier. You've really heard some of the planning timeline from some of the folks here just now, so we'll go quickly through that. But we did want to take a little bit of time to kind of talk about the history of Stowe Acres and kind of the context within town, which is important before we get into some of the mapping and the other particulars. It's also really important on any of these kind of big master plan type efforts to really understand what options a private property owner has at their disposal by state law and local bylaw. It's an important piece of the equation, and it helps us get a baseline and understand what benefits we can potentially go for in the future. And then we want to really let Peter Flinker take the majority of the time here tonight to talk about the exercise that he led the group through, and how we, came up with some of the initial ideas that we want to present for feedback tonight. So we can go to the next slide here. So we'll skip over the planning timeline. Know that it's here. I think folks did a great job of just explaining kind of the initial steps here from Peter Brown's initial approach through how we kind of got this project and the partners together. So just a little bit of context here. Of course, this is a map of Stowe, and Stowe Acres there is the kind of the bright spot in the southwest corner of Stowe. It's the oldest and largest of the 4 courses that we have in town. We have, of course, a few others that are in various zoning districts, but Stowe Acres, along with Butternut Country Club, are really the only 2 that are zoned residential. They've been zoned residential for a long time, so that helps us kind of understand what some of the future scenarios could be. So we'll go next here. So a little bit of more of a close-up here. Stowe Acres is really separated into 2 main parcels. It's 326 acres total. It's by any stretch inside 495 belt, it is a large site. It is right now the south course and the north course both operate as an 18-hole course, so it's 36 holes total. I think it's 36 out of 96 in Stowe. Total holes of golf. The main frontage for the property, in terms of kind of the planning and zoning world, is on Randall Road, and Randall Road really is kind of what bisects the 2 courses, and certainly where you get some of the best views and the most intimate kind of view of the course, for that matter, along Randall Road, and of course along Route 62 as well. And then from a kind of a natural resource perspective, a landscape perspective, you've got on the north side of the north course, at the top of the image, is Elizabeth Brook that kind of swoops down into, I think, Wheeler Pond. And then on the south end, at the bottom of the image, you see the Assabet River coming up and rounding the bend there around Rock Bottom Farm on its way into Gleasondale. So you've really got these 2 river systems that bound it on each side. So it's kind of just an interesting layout from the perspective of just kind of where it is in town. I'm going to hand it to Peter Brown to just talk a little bit about the history of the course and the club itself.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Some of the historical facts about Stowe Acres have been uncovered and saved by Bob McDonald, a Stowe resident and a friend of Stowe Acres. There are several interesting items in the history of golf at Stowe Acres. The course was originally known as Mapledale Country Club. And as I mentioned before, the South Course is 100 years old this year. Now, Mapledale was America's first full 9-hole golf course open to black men at the time. In 1926, the first Negro American Men's Open golf tournament was played at Mapledale, and results are also available for 1927 and 1928 tournaments at Mapledale. The results from 1927, there's a small article in an old Boston Globe paper dated September 6, 1927, which was interesting. So we're very proud of the historical significance of the course. And with the plan that Peter Flinker is going to be discussing as we move along, we look forward to preserving that history, along with preserving the clubhouse and everything that goes on there. So we're very happy to be part of this.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. So I just wanted to, kind of given that we're talking about the history, just go back a little bit here, probably more than a little bit, almost 70 years. This image here was taken just a couple of years prior to then the Page brothers purchasing the course, I think in 1954. And it was at that time that they expanded it into the 36 holes that we know today. So, without getting too philosophical here, I think one of the most interesting aspects of planning at this landscape scale is really just kind of understanding the impermanence of some of these land uses. It's just so easy to assume sometimes when we're looking at all of these maps that some of these landscapes are static, but of course, it really, they span generations, the changes that we're talking about. So in this image here, for instance, if you look on the left-hand side of the image, you'll see what is eventually going to be the Edson Road, Fairway Drive, 7-star neighborhoods that are farm fields in this image. On the opposite side of the image, towards the right-hand side, is kind of the Birch Hill, Robert Road area, which is all still dotted with what looks to be orchards. And then south of there, of course, is Honey Pot. And then, right at Randall Road there, you've got still the existing South Course prior to the expansion. The Randall Estate, which is likely the existing farmland that still stretches up towards what is now Butternut. And a lot of the future North Course and the South Course at that time were still wooded areas. And I think, it's interesting to kind of think about a long-term conservation vision and plan, in the way that, maybe there is a future where some of this actually reverts it somehow back to a pre-1950 land use. It's just it's a long time frame. So I thought it was a cool image to share. So the next thing I really want to talk about is, I think it's important to set the baseline is what is possible at Stowe Acres right now, because we're talking a lot about what kind of some of the shared outcomes and mutual benefits look like. And it's just important to know, what does the property owner have at their disposal? So the plan we're looking at right here is what we call a conventional subdivision. This is the kind of thing that all towns in Massachusetts have followed the state statute that allows for these types of conventional subdivisions. And this really is what kind of helps you both define value of a property, but also to measure, I think, what a better outcome could look like. It provides that type of baseline. So essentially what we're looking at is approximately 140 units, which is a general build out estimate that's been generally agreed upon for the two courses together. And likely what we would see, in all honesty, are the typical types of homes that are constructed in the Metro West region, of which Stowe is a part. And those are, the larger 4 to 5 bedroom homes. They each have their own well and septic. We've got a lot of these neighborhoods, and some of them are beautiful spots and places that are really part of the fabric of Stowe. But, I think for the sake of the conversation we're having tonight, they also a development like this also misses out on some opportunities. There really isn't an opportunity to have the kind of incentivize the types of open space gains that you could otherwise see. Certainly, we rarely see a real diversity of housing in the typical conventional style development. And you miss that opportunity to see how it could fit into the context of the landscape is what it really comes down to. Going ahead to the next slide here. The planned conservation development is another option. This is by special permit through the planning board. And this is something that Stowe has been proactive in writing the zoning bylaw to allow this to take place. This is certainly, I think, from a conservation standpoint, a better outcome than the conventional. And what it does is it allows you to take that same number of lots that you could build out in a conventional and cluster them in an orientation that would preserve 60% or more of a certain site as open space. So definitely a step forward from the plan we just saw. But yet it's still a big footprint. There's no question. And zoning is definitely a great tool, but it also can be clunky, and it can be difficult to have the kind of flexibility that comes with a complicated and nuanced site that has a lot of different factors and constraints that are all pushing and pulling on it. I do want to make note that these are plans that Peter, in all honesty, put together and worked on and looked at, because this was the kind of due diligence that they were doing. So this is the kind of stuff that they were working with. And it's helpful to see it now rather than to kind of come into the office one morning and find it on the counter. It's been a real benefit to see what could still be and be working towards another option as well. And so for that matter, we'll go to the last option that is at any developer's disposal, and that's the comprehensive permit from Chapter 40B. This is, of course, an opportunity that they can engage in at any time. 40B is often vilified. There's no shortage of community battle stories from across the state. But the reality is that at its best, a comprehensive permit can allow a town to kind of break out of that rigid zoning mold and really do something that is creative and really have a chance at something that reflects more of a master plan. It can provide for more than just kind of the typical increases in housing diversity that the state law that created it was really trying to go for. Of course, at its worst too, it's this kind of one size fits all stamp that you get some housing gains, but you lose a lot of that community context and that fit within the landscapes. So I really wanted to point out these three major development options as being things that that could go forward regardless of this discussion tonight. I mean, this is just the world and the planning world certainly that we're living in, and why it made this effort that we're talking about tonight that much more important. So we'll continue on here in the presentation, and I think at this point we're going to be handing it over to Peter Flinker.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. That's a great introduction to kind of the policy planning context of the site and the history. What I'm going to talk about is kind of the physical planning context. What we did is started by looking at existing town plans, including the open space plan, really think about how Stowe Acres fits into the larger town from a perspective of open space and recreation and ecosystems and housing needs, and really try to think about planning for this particular site in relationship to what's around it and what's needed and how it fits into the surrounding town. If you look at the open space map shown here, you can see the area of Stowe Acres is kind of a dearth of large open space. And that was identified in these maps from the open space plan and sort of called the underserved area in the plan. You see in blue are parcels that, at least at that point, were undeveloped, including the north and south course of Stowe Acres. And so there's a real interest in sort of building up the conservation in this part of town, particularly because it has such important natural resources like the Assabet River and the Elizabeth Brook. So we're certainly looking at how we can sort of advance that townwide open space agenda. When we look a little closer This is an aerial photograph from 2017, I think. You see the Randall Road and the north course and the south course. But so we're really looking from the Assabet River and Gleasondale to the south, all the way up to Elizabeth Brook and Great Road in the north, sort of framed by Hudson Road on the west and Gleasondale Road on the east. And again, you have this wonderful existing open space corridor that goes all the way up north and south with, largely developed areas to the east and west along the major roads. And if you look at it, this is an aerial photograph from the pictometry program, and it shows in the foreground the Assabet River and the south course, and then you cross Randall Road into the north course, and you see Elizabeth Brook. And you can see, even despite all the development that's occurred in the area over the years, there's still a lot of trees, a lot of open space. And that's part of what makes Stowe so special, is that even in the developed areas, you have a sense of open space and being out in the landscape. So these are some of the sort of technical drawings we got into. First, looking at understanding the site from the relationship of topography and drainage. So you can see some of the dense sort of contours. If you're familiar with a contour map, these are some of the drumlins. There's one on the south course. Of course, there's a large one up north of Elizabeth Brook, and a couple of others west of Hudson Road and over in Gleasondale. And the land sort of drains, of course, Elizabeth Brook to the north and the Assabet River to the south, and then a number of smaller tributaries that sort of split north and south from Stowe Acres and go into those respective tributaries. And that drainage, of course, has created a lot of wetland areas where you have sort of permanent flooding or high water table. This supports unique communities of plants and animals that are protected under the state federal wetlands acts. And so these are areas that can't be developed, and they're watched over by the Stowe Conservation Commission anytime there's a development project. And then we can overlay floodplains, and these are in blue is the 1% floodplain. This means that there's sometimes called the 100-year floodplain. But what it really means is that there's a probability of 1% in any given year that this area could flood. And in the orange or yellow there is the what's so-called 500-year floodplain, or 0.2% of annual probability that could flood. And if you're familiar with this area, you've probably seen some of these areas flooded, even the area north of Randall Road along as we zoom in, that's the driving range here, which probably, as we'll hear in a minute, used to be a wetland before it was a driving range. So these sort of corridors of wetlands and water bodies really define the sort of physical form of the landscape as they divide between the different hills and valleys. And looking again at the south course, you see the Assabet River in the foreground, Randall Road and Stowe Acres Country Club in the distance. So you have this sort of drainage, the major drainage of the Assabet River, and these tributaries, one of which goes off to the west and crosses Randall Road, and I think continues. And then one which splits the south course and goes up this drainage in the valley, past the clubhouse, and continues across the north course. And so these, again, are sort of the major structure of this sort of natural landscape. And then you have large areas of forest sort of along the river and reaching up in fingers in the site. And these are probably the most important ecologically valuable areas on the site. We know that most of the natural plants and animal species like to be near water, and they like to be in the larger areas of open space. So if you're thinking about ecological value, it's probably in these large patches adjacent to the water bodies. Other kind of resource, this is that knoll, which you saw on the sort of map. It's not as visible from this aerial perspective, but this is a really interesting feature. It goes up quite a bit, and it's somewhat sensitive too, because any disturbance here is going to eventually perhaps end up in the Assabet River. So if this was redeveloped for housing, it's more likely than other parts on the site to lead to some kind of potential runoff into the river and other wetlands there. If we look a little further north on the south course, see Randall Road and the Stowe Acres Country Club. At the upper part, you see Edson Street, Randall Road in the upper left. And some of the resources here, you have that sort of central drainage that comes down through the course and has been dammed and made part of the course. Then you have that sort of historic Mapledale golf course area, which was in that area along Randall Road. As we heard, this has got really interesting history. It's also connected to the history of Randall Road, the original Randall Farmstead and Estate. And so together with Randall Road, the golf course, and the clubhouse, it really forms kind of an interesting historical resource. Other kinds of resources probably are dominated by the visual value, scenic value that you get driving along Randall Road, where there's pretty much continuous views from the roadside out onto the course. It really is sort of quintessential Stowe landscape. That continues on the north course. We look at some of the resources here. We have the sort of water bodies of that drainage that continues from the south course onto the north course and eventually reaches an interesting kind of a spruce bog on an adjacent property, part of which is protected by town ownership and part of it is not. But again, it's really part of a larger intact forest area, which probably has the largest ecological value, particularly because it's connected to these larger wetland systems of the bog and then going north to the Elizabeth Brook. And then we have also the views, some from Randall Road, which are kind of partial screen views in between the vegetation, and some from private residences that abut the course on the eastern side. But a lot of it is this sort of high open space that was, sort of the core of the golf course. So if we look at some of the possibilities, that driving range area, which you see here, used to be part, well, it still is part of the 500-year floodplain, but it probably used to be a wetland. And if you look at the USGS map from 1968, you can actually see it was included as part of a large marshy, swampy area on that map before it was, I don't know if they filled it in, but they certainly cleared it off for the driving range. And it's still pretty wet, as you know, if you've gone by there. So there's a great possibility of perhaps enhancing that, reclaiming it as an ecological resource that would once again sort of buffer and extend the existing wetlands that are off the site and continuing up to that interesting bog to the north. So I haven't shown you all the maps that we did. This is sort of the highlights, but this is kind of a summary framework map showing sort of how the site potentially could fit into an open space network throughout this whole part of town. So again, fundamentally, that follows the rivers and streams from the Assabet up these drainages to the Elizabeth River. The darker green, well, this dark green tones are existing protected land. The sort of mid-green along the rivers are those wetlands and floodplains that are essentially protected under the State Wetlands Act. And then in yellow are other areas of sort of high resource value that should be protected, even though they're not protected by any law right now. So these include the sort of drumlins, which are kind of a unique landscape, both for their own value and also because they're sensitive in terms of future development. You really want to be careful in terms of developing those. It includes sort of wider buffers along the rivers and streams to sort of provide some enhanced protection around some of those. And it also includes some of the scenic resources and so on that you have along the roadside. And then in the green, these dashed lines are kind of a conceptual plan for a trail network that would follow these natural and cultural greenways and perhaps somehow create a connection between Gleasondale to the site to the south, up through the site, up through the Elizabeth Brook area, and then perhaps all the way up to Great Road. So there's existing open space connections there, though they're privately owned. Part of what we're looking at is how could redevelopment and conservation on Stowe Acres enhance and start to build this townwide network and extend the existing townwide network of trails that would connect north and south and perhaps east and west into some of the surrounding neighborhoods. So it's really, the town is at the stage now where you're talking about developing the last open pieces of land or protecting the last open pieces of land. So part of what we're learning through this sort of resource analysis is which lands are most important to protect, not just for their own sake, but because they create links in a larger network of open space connecting through the town. So some of the goals that we've been talking about with the team, first one, of course, connecting this, making a network of interconnected multi-use trails, linking different neighborhoods, creating an alternative to walking and biking along the busier roads to protect open land in this underserved quadrant. One of the things we'll talk more about is trying to find space for more playing fields, which there's not too many options in town. And so this might be a great opportunity for that. Another opportunity is to restore wetlands, not just to protect wetlands, but to bring back wetlands that used to be there, and also to protect and enhance the setbacks along the stream corridors of the river and the brook. Protecting scenic views, especially from Randall Road, has become more and more obvious as an important thing. And extending and protecting buffers around those highest quality habitat areas. And not least of which, to maintain golf on the site, which is important historically in the town and as an active recreational resource, which many thousands of people enjoy. So the contrast, of course, you think about all those things that are valuable on the site. The conventional development plan really doesn't allow any of that to continue. They can't develop the wetlands, as you see the Assabet River and these drainage. And this is, of course, looking at the south course with the golf clubhouse here. You can't develop the wetlands, but otherwise you can pretty much, the only thing you can do under the town zoning practically is to subdivide the land into 1.5 acre lots with 200-foot frontage. And this is, despite the fact that you have all this value for open space on the site, the easiest thing to do is to subdivide it into large lots. And the same thing on the north course, you see here with the Wheeler Pond, Elizabeth Brook on the top, and Randall Road at the bottom. Basically, it would be even easier on the north course to run a subdivision road, looping through that and to cut it up into 1.5 acre lots. So I think it's clear from the conventional plan that it's pretty buildable. The soils are good. It's not too steep, but it's not something that we want because you erase all of those open space values. So what could you do in between? If we look at our open space framework, there are 3 areas that really seem to have sort of the least resources or perhaps the best potential for development. So when we started to look at different development options, as you'll see, we looked at these 3 different areas. One is that sort of high ground along Randall Road, which does have some drainage through the middle of it. Another is the high ground behind the current clubhouse. Of course, that has the access through the existing clubhouse entrance, and there's parking lots and a lot going on there. And then probably the biggest area is on the north course, where you have that large sort of flat plateau up above the wetlands and the floodplains, but it appears to be quite buildable. So what we did is look at all of these areas, again, to think about what kind of development could you fit there, especially if you, instead of doing a sprawling development across the whole site, took the same number of units and clustered them together in more of a village pattern. So this is one of them. This is the clubhouse again in Randall Road. So this is a loop with houses on, I think, 1/2 acre lots. And this is done under the planned conservation alternative, which is possible under the current zoning. Here's a couple of other options with a different kind of a loop on the left and a more dense sort of village plan on the right. Now, this is not allowed under the current zoning, but these would be lots of, 5,000 or 6,000 square feet, which is more of a traditional New England village size. But you can see how the advantage of that is you take all the development that would sprawl across this site and put it in one place where you don't have to drive everywhere, could have a lot of sort of nice village scale amenities. This is a plan looking at that development area behind the clubhouse. So here's the parking lots behind the clubhouse. And this could take the form of a townhouse development where attached units are sort of stretched out parallel to the slope. So that was one possibility, but I think the conclusion is there's a lot going on there already, and how would the access work, etc. Looking at the north course, again, this is Randall Road at the bottom of the screen, the Elizabeth Brook at the top. So this is a cluster sort of village plan on the site of the driving range and the lot next door. So could we bring houses together, again, gathering all that development potential in a place that would be sort of a more compact, walkable center? It could still have some open space like ball fields in the front where the driving range is now. Another option is a planned conservation development on that larger plateau to the east and the north of the north course. And this could have an entrance road across from the clubhouse and several loops giving access to half-acre lots that would sort of be clustered around several different sort of small parks. And we also looked at the provision for ball fields, perhaps, on the site of the driving range. I think our conclusion was they fit there, but it's probably pretty wet and not necessarily the best spot to build ball fields. And this is, I think, the final option, which is pretty much on the same location as that planned conservation development, but it's an experiment with what if you had more units there, gathered the units not just from the north side, but also from the south side, and put them all in this one village location, because it appears to be a very buildable part of the site. So that could be, again, clustered around some small green spaces. It could have alleys with parking in the back, and then it could have a cluster of townhouses on part of it. Again, all of these are scenarios that we've done to sort of understand what's possible on the site. None of these is what's going to get built. None of these is necessarily something the developer is going to pick up and run with, but they're really helping to understand not just what part of the site could be developed, but how could you do it in the best possible way, achieve some of the goals that we'll be talking about for housing and open space, but also allow development of housing that people need. So if we look at those three different areas of the site, I think our conclusion was that the area up along Randall Road, it's got some topography, it's got some drainage going through it. It's also very visible from Randall Road and visible for anybody who drives through there. And so it's probably not the ideal spot for development. Same thing with the area up behind the clubhouse. Again, some access would have to go through the entrance to the golf course. It has some topography. It's got, some other constraints. But that area to the north really seemed to be rising to the top as the most developable and the least impactful on existing resources. So that's the one that we're really focusing on. So here's what we would call a conceptual master plan for redevelopment and conservation on the north course. So you'll see here a number of different features. We have that looping village road system coming in and other things which I'll talk about. So first is a continued 9-hole golf course, which uses most of the existing holes on the center of the course. And this provides for, an out and back golfing experience, leaving and coming back near the clubhouse. And it reuses existing course holes with the exception of a couple over on the west side, which would have to be rebuilt. Then next is an area that was about 60 acres in that central area. The next one is an area about 12 acres, which could be the site of town ball fields. And as you see here, this is, there could be a road coming in along the edge of the existing driving range with some parking in the back where there's a sort of driving range facility. And then you could take a pedestrian bridge over the stream there up to a cluster of ball fields that could include 3 or 4 full-size soccer fields and a full-size baseball diamond. And there's any number of different configurations this could take, depending on the needs of the recreation department. But there's quite a lot of space there for 10 or 12 acres of ball fields. The soil is good and it's pretty flat, so it wouldn't take too much to build those. Next is the possibility for a trail loop, which could be built partly on existing golf course cart paths and would connect all the way around the site and create a loop pretty easily of about 1 3/4 miles. This could be, a paved loop that could accommodate multiple uses, walking, biking, and so on, and would connect all the different parts of the site. And then sort of other land around the edge would be more of a natural conservation area. So that would include potential reclamation of the driving range, again, as a wetland, as you saw, extending the existing wetland and rebuilding what was there. It would include buffers that extend existing open woodlands adjacent to the site to the west. It would include potential reclamation of the old golf holes, the golf fairways on the north part of the site. There's 3 or 4 of them, which would no longer be needed. And those could be turned back into natural habitat by letting the grass grow up into meadows and managing the forest and so on, which would really extend the habitat diversity along the Elizabeth Brook. And then continuing around the east side, that could serve as a buffer to the neighboring properties. So this is the Butternut Golf Course. These are the properties just to the west of the site along Randall Road. And obviously these are the individuals as homeowners who are going to be potentially most impacted by redevelopment of this part of the site. So we're already thinking about what kind of a buffer could you create there to provide a little bit of a setback between existing homes and the new homes on the course. So that's the sort of development area. And this road pattern, again, it's kind of a simple grid, that sort of logical village pattern. What we like to do is not have all the traffic concentrated in any one place in the village. Obviously, it would have to concentrate on one entrance road, but within the village, there will be multiple routes and connections. This makes it safer. It reduces the need to have wide roads because there's multiple ways to get from one point to another. And it provides alternatives for public safety to get throughout the development. There also would be provision for shared wells, which would serve the entire village. So instead of everyone having their own individual wells, as you would have the conventional plan, there would be some shared wells that would be part of the sort of open space part. So this might be land that wasn't necessarily owned by the village, but they have an easement to use these wells, and that'll be worked out. But this will be open to the public as well as providing water supply for the village. And then finally, wastewater could be accommodated in several areas, again, shared for the whole village. You would have a shared wastewater system that could have its recharge under part of the course. This is the 9th fairway. And again, a great advantage, I think, ecologically of this approach is that instead of having 75 individual wells and 75 individual septic systems with relatively little treatment of nitrogen and so on, you could have one shared system that would provide a higher level of treatment for all of the homes in this new village. And so it collectively would have much less impact on the quality of the groundwater. So that's the sort of overall plan for the North Course, which you see here again, sort of zooming out, looking at both the north and the south. So an area, again, with about 60 acres of golf, another 85 in ball fields or conservation, and 32 acres in that village zone. And on the south course, basically the whole thing would be permanently protected as 18 holes of golf, as it is today. So the idea is to protect all of that so it could never be developed and keep it in golf. So the total, oh, and also there would be provision for extending that multi-use trail as a loop across the south side, and eventually perhaps connecting along the Aspet River to Gleasondale, if that's possible. So the total, I have it 328 acres, it's maybe 326, but only 32 acres, or 10% of that, would actually be developed for the new village. And almost 300 acres could be put into permanent conservation. So it's, again, I think something that you don't see a lot of this kind of effort on this scale. So it's a really exciting project, and you'll be hearing more about it, I'm sure. So, what would that development look like? Unfortunately, right now, the existing conventional plan, which is the thing that's really encouraged by the current zoning, is a large single-family house on 1.5 acres. Unfortunately, the developer's best alternative to that is going to the 40B, which would probably be these, I wouldn't say these are typical, but pretty typical higher density apartment blocks. And we really don't want to see, we don't need more large houses, and we don't want to see the site covered with sort of shoebox apartments. What we're really looking at is what's sometimes called the missing middle in terms of housing. It's a smaller single family houses, cottages, small attached units like townhouses, small apartment buildings, and so on. The kind of places where there's a real need, because so many people in Stowe and elsewhere, their family grows up, leaves home, they're stuck with a big house. They'd like to move to a smaller place, but not have to leave the town. So where do they go? I think a lot of people don't want to go to an assisted living necessarily. Someplace like that, they're looking for a smaller house, a place that has a sense of community, and a place that picks up on all of the amenities that village life can offer. So one of the great things that's happened in the last 10, 20 years is there's been a lot of examples of these kind of alternative development types, this kind of missing middle housing being developed around the state. This is a well-known project called Riverwalk in West Concord. It's a cluster of houses, very small houses, really not much larger than an individual apartment, but they're clustered around beautiful open space, all pedestrian, and you can't see it here, but the parking is all in the back. So what you see is this wonderful setting of a village, place to walk and meet your neighbors. You still have privacy in your own single family house, but instead of having to vacuum 3,000 square feet, it's maybe 1,000 square feet. Here's another example. This is a cottage community in Dennis. And again, it's small individual homes, some larger, some smaller, but they're really clustered around these beautiful open spaces leading, in Dennis, that leads to the beach. In Stowe Acres, it leads to the golf course and the woods and the bike trail. But the same idea is possible. And it's been done on a lot of different scales. This is a nice project called Red Mill Village, right off of 495 in Norton. And you really couldn't tell what kind of housing is here because it's been designed around the open space rather than being designed around the houses. The houses sort of shape the space that people are in. And this is something that landscape architects love, right? We talk about this a lot, but it really picks up on the traditions of the New England village, where the homes cluster around a town green, they line up along a beautiful sidewalk. And so you get a sense of walking through a shared space, not just walking past somebody's front yard in a driveway. And this is a sort of an aerial showing that space and the sort of townhouses behind it. And one of the reasons this worked is all the parking is behind it in these alleys. And behind these buildings, there's an alley. So you don't see the parking, you don't see the garages. What you see is the beautiful front of the houses. And that's, the space where people hang out. And there's a small sort of commercial center at the entrance, but a lot of the focus again is on the central space and the space of the streets. So it really encourages walking and encourages people to leave their car parked and to walk around to see their neighbors and so on. This is looking at it again. You can see it's really a mix. You come in, there's a commercial area, there's townhouses on the north side, and this is sort of the beginning of a single family neighborhood on the south side. But both the townhouses and the single family are quite close together. So it's really efficient in terms of use of space. They have the garages in the back, and then the open space is protected around the outside. There's community gardens, there's a community center, there's a swimming pool, all the typical amenities that you might have. But the big amenity is this sense of place, the sense of living in a real village that you get as a result. And just driving in ordinary street, it feels like a traditional New England street. It doesn't feel like you're moving into an Anywhere USA condo development. So that's really some of the principles that we're after. This is another project in Northampton, Massachusetts. This is a redevelopment of the Northampton State Hospital. But what they did is they tore down most of it and rebuilt it again with a grid of village streets. And one of the nice things that this demonstrates is the variety of houses that you can put into a new development that really echoes what used to be in a traditional village or town, where you have, excuse me, larger single family lots on the outside. You have smaller single family on a different street over here. You have some small apartments and townhouses in the middle. You have assisted living as part of this. And you know, this is unique to this particular situation, but it's part of this larger trend toward what's sometimes called a neo-traditional planning, where you're really looking at, you know, how we used to do things before we had cars in particular, and trying to learn from that. And the result is you have something that looks like a traditional village, beautiful sidewalks with the buildings and the porches and no cars, and beautiful interior pedestrian spaces. And, you know, these buildings are actually attached townhouses, but they're designed to look like single family houses. And all of it really reflects the traditions of the New England sort of architectural tradition. And it includes, you know, some small apartment buildings. So not big shoe boxes, but smaller boxes, but really nicely designed with a lot of detail. So it doesn't feel like a big stretch between a single family house and a multifamily building, right? It's sort of that middle ground where you have these nice attached townhouse units, small apartment buildings, high quality of detailing, and so on. So that's really what we're after. So these are the principles that all these projects really have in common, right? They're compact and efficient form that conserves resources. It's cheaper to build, it's cheaper to maintain. It is also more sustainable because you're using less resources to pave all that asphalt and to take care of it. It promotes, by its compact nature, walking and biking. Cars are welcome, but they don't dominate it. We put them in the back, we put them in parking lots. We let people store them someplace where you don't have to see it. Diverse housing choices, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Providing housing where people can stay throughout their lives, right? Right now I have kids who are in their 20s, they're looking for a place to live. Hard time finding a house in the same place we live. So they're going elsewhere. Wouldn't it be nice for our children to find a place where they can stay in the same town? Wouldn't it be nice for our parents and ourselves as we get older to be able to stay in the same town and have a place we're really proud of? It's not just assisted living or a condominium community. And again, that idea of a project which is organized around the public realm of streets and parks and greenways. So what you focus on is the shared space, not the private space. It's there, we can admire those houses, but what we're also sharing is the beautiful streets and parks and so on. And that maintaining that connection to the surrounding landscape. Again, this was the tradition of the New England village going back. It wasn't an isolated sort of urban cluster. It was a village surrounded by the landscape. And again, we have a wonderful opportunity here to recreate that feeling. And as a result, it will be rich in recreational opportunities, be able to walk down the street onto a bike trail, to go golfing if that's your thing, to go out bird watching in the open space. All of these things which we love about towns like Stowe can continue on this site. So that brings us back to you, Jesse, I think. Talk a little bit more about the town's goals for housing and so on.
Yeah, just thank you. That was great, Peter. I appreciate kind of putting out some of the principles, you know, some of the planning principles that underpin different ideas around housing and planning and site planning and how we can, you know, manage a landscape of this size. So I just wanted to kind of reflect that we're not really doing any of this in a vacuum. And one of the things that we did early on in the process, certainly for myself, coming into this was trying to get a sense of, you know, what are the other planning documents that we have in town? What have they really said about Stowe Acres? What kind of lessons can we learn more broadly? And so, you know, just taking a look at some of the key housing trends in Stowe, you know, a lot of these trends are really regional and some of them even national, but we know from our housing production plan back in 2016 that we're hopefully going to be getting ready to update again shortly, that the homes are getting bigger and that families are getting smaller. That is what the data is showing. I'm interested to see the new 2020 census data to see how that trend line goes. By 2030, nearly a third of residents will be over the age of 65 in town, which is, it's a huge number. And so one of the things we're thinking about from a housing perspective is how, what does that mean for folks? Is there opportunity for people to stay in town? What are the kinds of things that they're going to be looking for, that demographic will be looking for in terms of their housing as they age? Are there age in place opportunities, things like that? These kinds of numbers help us to get to, the kinds of discussions we need to have about what the future is going to look like in Stowe, and who's going to be included in it. And then I think another important stat is that 20% of residents in Stowe qualify for these affordable units that that really make up our subsidized housing inventory. But 90% of those units created are out of their price range. Anybody who's been paying attention to the listings these days recognize the the price of land, the price of homes in Stowe and in surrounding towns is just going up, up, and up. And there are folks that are simply left out of the mix, but it is not. It's not impossible to make some other options out there to find what Peter referred to as kind of that missing middle and make sure that there is a diversity of options out there. It doesn't have to be a range of homes that are at the, that lowest affordability rating, but a range, a diversity rather than homogeneity. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, Peter. And the other thing that I was looking at, given that we had talked about, the comprehensive permit and kind of some of the shortfalls of the existing zoning and the statutes of the state, is our own comprehensive permit policy that was adopted by the selectmen back in 2013. And really what that policy was trying to do was provide a guide for developers that might be interested in using a comprehensive permit to find something that fit within the context of Stowe. And some of the things that pulling right out of that plan was this idea of village design with a mix of unit types and sizes, having different tenure options. So some are ownership, some are rental, opportunities to age in place for seniors. We have senior housing in Stowe. A lot of folks automatically think that that is restricted housing. It doesn't have to be. There's a lot of creative ways to make units age targeted to allow people to be able to kind of to age in that one space. And they have, maybe it's doors that can accommodate wheelchairs, maybe it's 0-step entrances. There's different ways to do it, but those are the kinds of things we can begin to think about. And then this idea of having some public benefits, communal facilities. You often hear, every now and again, you'll hear a development pitch somewhere that says, we build lifestyles, not homes. But the idea is that in reality, the idea of having this kind of community feel is very much a thing that sometimes we've gotten lost on in some of the other developments where we didn't have enough opportunity to have input. And last thing, what I thought was just interesting reading through the comprehensive permit policy is this idea of town participation opportunities. Are there opportunities for the town to actually engage open space acquisition, things like that, that we're really pointing to this kind of effort? And it's not easy. It's just simply not easy to do. And most of the time it just doesn't happen. So sometimes when you see those plans, you think, yeah, of course, yeah, in a perfect world, which makes it exciting that we found ourselves where we are now. So I'll leave it at that and hand it over to Kathy.
I just wanted to wrap up my section by saying that in addition to the housing and planning goals that Jesse's highlighted, I wanted to just underscore how the plan advances multiple goals that are in the open space and recreation plan. So when we prepared the plan back in 2016, really one of the top priorities was for the town to work proactively to plan for the future of Stowe's 5 golf courses, looking to identify those areas that are most important to protect, and then identifying the areas that would be suitable for development. So Peter has talked about some of the ways that this plan would advance the goals of the plan, protecting land in the underserved quadrant, really protecting some parcels that have the potential for a lot of land use change for Stowe, scenic landscapes, wildlife habitat, and then providing some additional active outdoor recreation opportunities. Next slide. And when we did the open space plan, there were really 3 or 4 top priority community needs that came out of a survey that we did, came out of the work that we did on the plan. Far and away, the #1 request from Stowe residents was to identify additional walking and cycling opportunities. And so with this plan, we would look to extend the Emerald Necklace that interconnects many of the open space parcels in Stowe to this area down in Southwest Stowe. And we also see the potential to develop a trail that would run roughly parallel to Route 62 and would give people an opportunity for walking and cycling off of that windy road. It won't get you there all the way at this point. Obviously, it would still need to go through Butternut to Wheeler Road, but it would serve as the foundation for that future connection. And then one of the other top recommendations was really to identify some parcels, or ideally one large site that could meet the town's future recreation needs for active ball fields, soccer fields, ball fields, baseball diamonds. And so the plan that Peter has put together here is really just one possible configuration of that parcel, but we would look to work with the Recreation Commission, who's been briefed about this, some of the other user groups, to really figure out what the best configuration of the fields might be to meet our long-term needs. And then lastly, we know that we have an aging population in Stowe, and both the Recreation Department and the Conservation Department have been working together to identify places that we can create more accessible trails for people. None of us is getting any younger. And what we hear more and more from people is, I came here for the open space and the trails, and I really can't get out on them anymore. I can't walk my dog on the uneven surfaces. I need places to go that are easier walking. So one of the nice features of this property is that it is relatively flat and does offer the potential to create some more accessible trails. And then last slide, just some of the other recreational benefits. We've had interest in expanding skiing opportunities in Stowe. Ice skating on some of the ponds could happen here. There's the potential to open up more public access to Assabet River and Elizabeth Brook, and also to protect the views of these properties from the water for people that are out on them kayaking and canoeing. And then obviously the continued traditional use of the property for golf, which I know a lot of people feel is very important and part of our town's community character. So I'll wrap up there.
You're muted.
Okay, yes. All right, thank you. So I'm gonna just wrap up, and we will do a little bit of Q&A, and hopefully we'll be around 9 o'clock ending potentially. So, I look back on some of these previous planning efforts, and I'm one of those folks who I really do keep the master plan on my desk, and we look at it often. It's always interesting to see what folks were talking about and thinking about even before I got here. I'm going on, close to 9 years now here in Stowe, and I take this seriously. And my family jokes that Stowe is my other hometown. And I really am, I feel like some of the work that we've done in the past, it's really a validation that for a lot of the volunteers' work over the years, when you think about kind of what it's taken to put all of this together and really move forward and be ready to address an opportunity when it kind of gets plopped on you. We didn't get here by accident. I'm clear-eyed about the fact that there's going to be some serious concerns. There will be people that will have doubts that or just don't agree on something that they saw or the whole approach or what have you. And that's how things go. But I do hope and ask that those folks will stick with this process nonetheless. Because it is, I think, that important. And we've been lucky enough, I think, to be able to work with the property owner and the developer and all these different interests in an atypical way that I've just seen so many times and heard from so many other colleagues and planners in other towns. It just doesn't happen like that often. And so I'm feeling lucky. Obviously, I'm feeling hopeful. And, you know, there's a lot of hard work still to be done, of course. But we know that we have a property owner that has his own rights and can move forward. And we're trying to be respectful of the realities that we're faced with here. So I think regardless of what folks hear tonight, what they feel about what they've heard tonight, just know that this is a comprehensive planning effort. We are kind of acknowledging that inevitability that change is coming, and we're trying to get it steering in the direction that, you know, we've been working towards a long time. With that being said, I want to go quickly, have Bob talk a little bit about the next steps, and we can begin to take some comment. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, do we have that slide for the next steps?
Do we?
I believe we do. There should be one more, Peter.
Sorry,
It's quite all right.
stopped prematurely. There it is. There we go.
If you could
Can you see
share your
that?
screen.
Not showing yet.
Ah,
We were doing so well.
I was doing so well. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. Appreciate it. So just very quickly, just because we didn't want to put all of this out there without also providing some information of so what happens from here. So first, reviewing the comments from tonight and those that will come in subsequent to tonight, and the email address is, you see at the top there, Stowe Acres Plan at stowe-mass-ma.gov. Those will all be taken very, very seriously, and we will do our best to incorporate all of them, address all of them, that is. We will continue to work with the stakeholders and refine the approach. I think you could probably hear from all of us our enthusiasm and the fact that these diverse interests that were at the table putting together this vision all truly came away very enthused about the comprehensive shared vision. The conservation components, I really view the conservation portion of the outcome as the glue that will hold everything together. You know, if you think about one of the primary desires of having an outcome that is comprehensive and assured, it doesn't leave something that might change, might turn into something that's undesirable in the future. The conservation pieces of this, in terms of the land that's acquired for conservation or active recreation and the conservation easement on the south course, those are the acquisitions that will help glue everything together to make sure that this vision holds together and is in fact implemented. After the appraisals are completed, we'll be negotiating with the Stowe Acres owners, and we will be submitting a request for funding for phase 1 of the conservation piece of this at annual town meeting. Remember that at the beginning of this, we stepped into a dialogue that was in process between a private landowner and a prospective developer. And what that means is that we need to move forward and be committed to a timeline. And so first phase will be at this annual town meeting. We'll be presenting a request for some funding there. And that will be followed by additional presentations that would follow relative to the conservation pieces of it. So with that, I think we'll go to questions and answers. And Kathy, do I go to you for that?
Sure, I will try, having never done this before in Zoom. So we have a lot of questions, some comments. There are some questions that have easy answers. There are some questions that will take more thought. So what I'm going to do is just try to go through some of them that I think we can probably answer tonight. And then what we're going to do is take the questions and the comments and compile them and put them up on the website with, you know, what answers we have now or where we're going to have to do some more work. So for folks who don't get their questions asked or, you know, don't feel like they have enough information yet, there's still time, and we'll continue to take questions and comments by email to the address that was listed. So with that, there is a question here, I think probably for you, Peter Brown, wanting to know what the tax status of the property is. And I'm going to group some of these. What is the current tax status of the property? And are there any covenants that would limit development of the property?
Well, the property is in Chapter 61, so that's the only thing affecting the tax. So that would have to be dealt with. And there are no covenants on the property that restrict development.
Okay. And then Jesse, for you, I'm going to again bundle a couple questions. Somebody wants to know what percentage affordable housing we are at today. And then there are a number of questions that kind of get to, and this may also be for you, Peter, that get to the issue of traffic impacts and, you know, how is that going to be looked at as this process goes forward?
Okay. Well, I'll start with the easy answer, which is we are at 7.4% on the state's subsidized housing inventory for Stowe, which means that 7.4% of the housing units currently in Stowe are priced affordable to someone making an income that qualifies with the state statute. Obviously that number is probably going to change a little bit. Well, it's definitely going to change. We'll find out just how much, but it shouldn't be much when we get the 2020 census data. And, you know, we've obviously added some housing units since 2010. And so we're going to get a slightly different percentage there, but nonetheless, that's where we're at on the SHI calculation. The traffic one question is certainly a great one, and one that is, you know, the perennially difficult things to manage with any big change on the horizon. So the way that we're kind of approaching, the way that I'm thinking about this from, you know, working with the Complete Streets Committee and Traffic Advisory Committee and others, we've reached out just preliminarily to public safety so far. To really get a sense of some thoughts about some of the primary intersections in and around the area, just to get some initial feedback. You know, so that's everything from, you know, Crossroad, Route 62, Hudson Road, all the feeders, the arterials, the roads that kind of lead in and out of an area like Stowe Acres. I think there's an interesting thing that we need to plumb a little more, and that is the difference between what over the long term is likely a decrease in the golf use and how that will be potentially evened out by an increase in residential use. Because, you know, right now, Peter Brown, I can't recall the statistic offhand, but the number of golf trips is significant in terms of the traffic that's generated from the current use. And we do want to try to get a good understanding of, you know, what the delta is between some of potential future build out scenarios and what's taking place now. So definitely some data to still look at and parse through. And I think from the planning perspective, there are some intersections in town that we know we need to be looking at, and we're, you know, quite frankly, we're in the early process of trying to position ourselves for state and federal funding for making some improvements to those intersections, such as the town center, Route 62, 117 intersection, and looking at that 117 Hudson Road intersection. So I think what we have is kind of a short, medium, and long-term plans and ideas on how to manage traffic, which I think is really the right approach. Doesn't mean it's always the perfect one, but a lot to still be done. Definitely folks that have more expertise than I do in that matter, in that topic can weigh in, and we'll certainly have to get that feedback. So thanks for the question.
Bob, question coming to you about the South Course. Actually, two different people have asked similar question. There was a comment that the remaining golf course would be permanently protected. Is that true? How does that happen? And did you really mean to say that the South Course would be in golf? I think maybe from somebody who thought it would be developed.
So the plan, part of the vision here is to preserve the entire, conserve is probably a better word, the entire South Course. And that's for a whole lot of reasons. It's because the more appropriate development area we've concluded is on the North Course. It's because there's historical significance of the South Course, as Peter Brown outlined so well earlier. It's because of the ecological sensitivity along the Assabet River. And so our plan under this vision is to acquire a permanent conservation restriction known as conservation easements outside of Massachusetts on the entire South Course that would accommodate ongoing golf. That conservation easement or conservation restriction will be in effect in perpetuity. And we hope golf will go on as long as any of us can even imagine. But we feel that golf is a good open space use, and we'd really like to lock that in so that doesn't change going forward. And if anything, we can enhance some of the open space conservation habitat values of that South Course, and also add some public access components, particularly along the Assabet River.
Okay. Mark, there are a whole bunch of questions here for you that, if I could sort of generally frame them, have to do with wanting to hear a little bit more of your thinking about what percent of the units might be affordable, how many units you're thinking about building, what the development program might look like in that development pot.
Sure. I mean, so far we've been talking about a broad range of product, and I think really the next phase of this, as we've discussed internally, is to start, looking at the development zone a little more particular. We've talked about a need for, as Peter Flinker did, that middle space of, more, new but more modest size homes in 1,600 to 2,000 square feet that would be for sale and, more readily available to a broad range of people than the kind of McMansion, so to speak, that is built in a lot of locations. We've talked about on some of the exterior lots, potentially having some homes that are a little bit larger, but not large by today's standards, up into the, maybe into the middle 2,000 square feet, a little more expansive, a little more value to help, augment the overall program. But we've also talked about doing some rentals as compared to some of the traditional rental buildings that you see in other parts of the presentation, we've been looking at a model that would really be based on small cottages, individual residences, 2 bedrooms, all on 1 floor, suitable for people that are empty nesters and downsizing and might have concerns about going up and down stairs, but also perfect for young couples, families, single people. And a portion of those would be affordable. We've also talked about the potential of trying to create a location within the property for a structure that would be suitable for more of elderly residents of very modest means, and potentially trying to get some units down into the 50% affordability range as compared to the typical 80%. So where you see, properties like, plantation apartments that have waiting lists that I hear are, hundreds of people long and have difficulty, getting into it because of the limited space, also have difficulty dealing with second floor units. So we're really trying to put together a program that can meet that, broader range of people throughout the town and throughout the broader area. We haven't, really sit down to focus on, what that total mix will be. And I don't think we're quite at that level yet. But it would have, again, affordable rentals and market rate rentals, hopefully different styles in the bungalow sense, as well as a more garden style for elderly. And then within the for sale properties, again, a range that would be that, that middle range for homes that could range from, 1,600 square feet to 2,600 square feet. And I think a lot of the features that you saw in some of those other properties of, front porches. I've been, working a lot in trying to, take the focus off the vehicle, as Peter was saying, and have properties that are facing green space and keep the cars on the perimeters and in alleys. It's designing small homes with, big 2-car garages next to it it's a really, it's a difficult thing to put together. And I think some of the initial ideas from Peter are really terrific, and we'll offer a range to make a really interesting streetscape and try to, again, accommodate a broad range of people, which has been one of the focuses that we've been talking about since day one.
Peter, question for you and Mark about timing. Kind of how soon do you think that you might be breaking ground?
Nothing moves quickly in anywhere, even with, I think I can speak for, from a development side, and Peter can talk about it as well. It's, I think it's been really encouraging working with the town so far. And I have generally always worked on the basis that, excuse me, spending more time upfront before you make submissions ultimately creates a more streamlined approach, in that, nobody's surprised by everything. Everybody knows what's coming, and any of the significant issues you kind of flesh out in kind of pre-planning sessions. I think we've been doing a lot of that in this process, and there'll still certainly be more once we get into dealing with those pesky engineering issues and the well and the wastewater systems that Peter Flinker had outlined. I mean, those systems alone, they take almost a year to get approved. So this isn't something that's going to happen tomorrow, but we're going to be looking to start advancing more specific plans for town feedback and start working with the individual boards, this spring and the summer. But it certainly will be at least a year before there'd be any actual work. I wouldn't envision that even next year's golf season may not be impacted. So it will take a while to put all the details together.
There have been a couple questions about playing fields, which I will try to take, but we'll also answer further in the written Q&A when Laura can contribute to them. But I think the questions were, was the need for additional playing fields, given that Stowe Community Park was built and completed since the open space and recreation plan, was that taken into account? And the answer to that is yes. The sense from the recreation department was that we still need additional playing fields, even with Stowe Community Park built. And one of the big issues for them is that they never have an opportunity to rest any of the existing fields. So they're in constant use, which takes a real toll on the fields. And also that a number of their fields are on the wet side, so that they would really like some drier fields for the long term. And the questions are still coming in. So I will say that there are a whole bunch of questions that center around the issues of climate change and green energy and things that might be done to further advance some of those goals for the town. I think we'd like to pick those up later in some written responses. There are also kind of a suite of questions around the issue of impact on taxes, impact on schools, impact on property values and community services. And I know, Jesse, that's something that you've been giving a lot of thought to. We've talked with police and fire. COA is another issue. You know, what's the impact on them? And then there are a number of questions around kind of the cost to the town of this approach, as opposed to, you know, purchasing the whole property or letting the property be developed as it might be by Stowe Acres. So those are big questions that I think we're going to need some more time to get answers to, unless anybody wants to say anything on any of them. And Bob? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, so I would, you know, just in terms of, I'll touch on it. I agree that it's a complicated series of issues that needs a lot of study, but I will say that I'm convinced that the town has the opportunity, by working simultaneously with the prospective developer in approaching a landowner, each of us can leverage the involvement of the other from a cost value perspective. So, you know, put differently, there's an opportunity for us to get what we just described as outcomes for the town in terms of conservation and recreation at a much lower cost, because we're participating with someone else who's bringing dollars to the table. While I have the mic, I will also say that part of the plan here is for ecological restoration, as Peter Flinker described. There's a really strong climate response angle of that, and it also opens up really great potential for state funding to help underwrite and reduce some of the town costs in terms of those conservation and recreation components.
Great. So with the hour getting late, Peter, I'm going to close with one last question to you, which is not about this plan, but just an interesting question in light of the presentation tonight. And that is whether Stowe Acres has any plans to celebrate / commemorate the history of the South Course and the where did it go?
100 years.
The 100 years. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to work on that now. If people have some ideas, we'd love to hear them. So you know, feel free to submit those. But yeah, we would like to do some work and commemorate the 100 years. It's a really fun goal. You know, when we bought it 5 years ago, I was thinking about that. You know, if we owned it in 5 years, it'd be fun to be there for the centennial. So yeah, we'd like to do something.
The person that asked the question seemed interested in constructing some sort of a monument or a memorial space and working with the Historical Commission. So more on.
Oh, okay. Okay, we'll look into that.
All right. Any parting words? Jesse, do you want to say anything?
All I'll do is just thank all the folks in attendance. Great to have so many folks on. I know there's going to be a lot of questions coming. I really urge people to use that email address that we put out, and to give us a day or so to get the web page populated with some of the background stuff that you saw today, and we'll be working on that over the remainder of this week. So folks know how to reach out to me and to Kathy, who are available during the week, and we can point you in the right direction, and certainly keep track of all comments, questions, and stuff that comes in. So thank you again, much appreciated.
And the emails that come into that box will go to both Jesse and I, and we'll share them with the group. So thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.